Welcome to the Mary Seco Youth Voices podcast, which is sponsored by VERU. Today we'll be speaking about sexual rights, and we are joined by Kelsie, who has come from the Luton Sexual Health Clinic.
Yeah, hi Jade, thanks for having me here today.
My pleasure. So tell us a bit about what you do in the Luton Sexual Health Clinic.
So at Sexual Health, I'm one of the outreach workers. My actual job title is Sexual Exploitation Outreach.
Oh, wow.
So my job kind of has two prongs. I work a lot in schools with young people who might be at risk of being exploited, or my professionals might think that they maybe are being exploited, but they don't necessarily know themselves yet.
Yeah.
And then I work with women who are older and further down the sort of scale of exploitation, maybe people who are commercial sex workers or who have a lot of vulnerabilities around kind of helping break down the barriers and helping them to access sexual health services.
Well, thank you for your services.
You are very welcome, and so are they.
So can you please tell us what our sexual rights are?
So that is quite a big question.
It is,
what
right?
are our sexual rights? And actually, it's really funny because I had a conversation with a young person yesterday, and one of the things we discussed was their right to pleasure when it came to like sex and relationships.
Yeah.
And that simply you're allowed to have sex, but also you are allowed to enjoy the sex you're having, and that's actually a really important part of it, and not very often part of the conversation. I think when we talk about what are our sexual rights, it's our right to be with who we want to be with without fear of discrimination or judgment. It's about our right to education, so we have the confidence to make informed choices about our sexual health and well-being, and our right to things like accessing contraception, which is like revolutionary for women, really, to be able to take control of like reproductive rights and things like that.
One of the things that you touched on was, you know, like say for example, the right to pleasure and the right to. I feel like that's something that a lot of people, even where you said it's quite revolutionary, with regards to the access, especially for women, to contraception. I feel like it's also quite revolutionary that you are actually advising young people this as well, because I feel like a lot of young people, they just think it's wham bam thank you ma'am, and they don't think about the whole process of it. I think in adulthood it's more brought up. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the thing is that like sex education focuses a lot on sex for reproduction, whereas
like the biology
like
of it.
if we're really honest, the majority of sex that's being had by the majority of people is not for the purpose of reproduction, it's for the purpose of pleasure. So we want to empower young women, especially young girls, to know that their pleasure is important too, and like you are not just there to be like receptive to sex for someone else. It is also your right to enjoy the experience you're having.
So another question that I have for you is, could you please explain to us more about consent? Because I feel like sometimes there's a blurred line when it comes to consent. I think growing up for me, like in sexual education, they didn't really go into it a lot, and I feel like in general people do have quite a blurred line when it comes to consent. So can you just like expand on like consent and what that entails?
So we use a lot the term enthusiastic consent.
Oh, I like that.
So enthusiastic consent is when your consent is given freely and voluntarily because you want to. So obviously consent means saying yes, or it means the lack of saying no. Sometimes people will take an inaudible no as consent, but actually what we're really trying to explain to young people is that just because you've asked 10 times and eventually the person says yes, that doesn't necessarily count as you've got their consent, because it's not necessarily enthusiastic. If you are having to convince somebody or pressure somebody into giving consent, then it's not given freely. I think a lot of young people will have seen the video where people talk about consent being like tea. And like, you're not going to pour a cup of tea on someone when they're asleep. You're not going to, just because they said they wanted tea earlier, it doesn't mean that they still want it now. And although it is used a lot, it does really a good job of explaining what we mean. So when we talk to young people about consent, we talk about it being given freely, given enthusiastically, and not sort of influenced or threatened into it. And that's the kind of point they don't understand. A lot of young people don't understand why they can't say no So it's a really big thing. Like they'll say, oh, well, I didn't say no. And actually we need people to understand that a lack of saying no is not the same as giving consent.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's funny you should say that about the tea consent, because it's something that I actually wasn't aware of until a little while ago, and I feel like the way that it was explained was really, really good. And I also feel like everybody can relate, especially being British.
Yeah,
it really helps to gain that understanding, because a lot of British people drink tea.
It's funny, so like when you watch the video of young people, like it can seem really laughable, like somebody's laying in bed asleep and someone's just dumping liquid over their head, like. And actually, it's a really good tool to be like, yeah, look how ridiculous that behaviour is. And when they laugh at it, that's encouraging, because it means if you can understand that this is inappropriate, you can actually understand why it might be inappropriate in another situation.
Well, we will be actually showing the tea consent video for the young people as well. So that will be really great, because we'll be able to spread that to more people across Bedfordshire. So when it comes to sexual rights and enthusiastic consent, do you feel like there's enough information or education on that subject?
I mean, I think it's getting better. And I think a lot of work is being done by schools, colleges, professionals to kind of bring home that message. But I don't think we're quite there yet.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. We appreciate you and your services. Back. Yes, we'll definitely invite you again soon. And now we'll be speaking to some of our young people when it comes to sexual rights and enthusiastic consent. So, Jojo, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Jojo. I'm from Luton, born and raised, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, to kick things off, do you know what your sexual rights are?
My sexual rights to me, and what I find is my sexual rights, is being able to be yourself with someone, not forcing yourself on anyone, and being consensual.
Yeah.
It works two ways, you know?
Yeah.
When you're with someone, when you want to be with someone, like, and grow with someone, you need to make sure that you know about them, and you're not forcing yourself to do things that someone else wants.
Yeah.
Literally.
I like that. That's dope. I think as well, it should definitely include you being, I guess, as liberated or not as liberated as you want to be, and being able to express yourself sexually, obviously within like a reason and respectfully, do you know what I mean? But being able to express yourself sexually as well, freely, without being like judged or anything. Well, we also asked some of our young people this question, and here is what they had to say. Do you know what your sexual rights are?
Yes and no. For me personally, like if I say no, like no means no. If I don't want to do something, I shouldn't feel like I have to be forced to do something.
I know that you've got the right to privacy and, you know, to protect yourself, but I wouldn't say they're sexual rights, they're general rights that should protect you sexually. But no, my answer is no, I don't know my sexual rights.
No, I believe that as a man I have the right to decline or accept people putting sexual situations on you.
And understanding.
Do you mean as in like the right to say no, or
That is, all the right to say yes. So I can see, like, from what the young people have said, some people are aware what their sexual rights are, but some people are also not aware what their sexual rights are, and I feel like it's because they haven't really been educated on sexual rights. I feel like in sex education, I don't know for like this newer generation, but I don't feel like they used to really touch on like what sexual rights are when it came to sex. They just talk about the reproductive side of it.
Literally. They tell us about our body parts and that's it.
Yeah.
They don't tell us about the functions and how two people can intertwine and do you know what I mean?
The intimacy. Yeah, they don't talk about the intimacy. They don't talk about sexual rights. They don't talk about consent. And there was a lot there where a lot of people have spoken about consent when pertaining to sexual rights, because that is a big part of sexual rights. In fact, there's a really good clip about tea consent that we're going to show you now that we really want to share with you, because it really gives a good understanding for consent.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea, don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
I actually didn't know about tea consent until quite recently, and I really like the comparison and how it's explained. What do you think about tea consent, and when did you learn about tea consent?
So I learned about it in high school, but it disappointed me how late down the line we got taught it.
Yeah.
Like the tea consent video, we only found out about when we were in about year 9, year 10.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, we'd already learned about our reproductive system and stuff from primary school.
Yeah.
So finding that out a bit late doesn't make sense. If we had, like, there's certain people that I know that are a bit corrupt. If they had heard that from young, they might not have been how they are now. Do you know what I mean?
No, I agree.
There's a lot of people that are corrupt out there because they hadn't been taught what they needed to be taught from young.
I agree, and I feel like it is, when people, like you said, they might be corrupt, or maybe they don't make the greatest decisions when it comes to things like this. I feel like when you're really young is when a seed should be planted.
Literally.
I feel like when you start secondary school, you've already started puberty. That's the thing. Sex education seems, when you actually deep it, sex education seems to start when it's around the time puberty starts.
Yeah.
And you start to learn about sex education, reproductive systems, and they touch on like the basic biology, I guess, of it. I feel like consent and stuff like that. When I was in school, I don't even remember being taught about consent. Like, luckily, I grew up in like a family where like my granddad was very open, talking about things when pertaining to like sex and intimacy and stuff, and teaching us from young so that you're not afraid of it, but that so you're not what we call fast and go and do what you're not meant to be doing either. Do you know what I mean? So for me, that's how I knew about consent, because I was taught, and really education does start in the home. You can't rely on the school system. However, it would have been so cool if they taught it then, because there were times when you're in high school, you know, the boys like to touch on the girls' bums and vice versa too. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you knew about consent and stuff then you would know, like, when you're making somebody feel uncomfortable and when it's the right
serious.
Yeah, and it just makes things a lot more easier as well, so that there's no issue when it comes to those things. Because like I said, girls also did it to boys, might squeeze their bum or whatever, they're messing around, it might even be their friend, but they don't like it. And they didn't say you can touch them. What are you doing? And then vice versa with the boys, obviously touching on the girls. What it also helped me to understand is that because they're making it about tea, it makes it more universal. Yeah. Because I feel like when we talk about sexual rights, we often talk about women and like how men are towards women when it comes to like sexual rights and consent and all of this stuff.
But it does work both ways, definitely.
Exactly, it works both ways. And I feel like it also needs to be related to men and how sometimes they don't want to be touched, or they don't want to do that, and nobody wants to feel like they're backed in a corner either. So I think it's really important that I'm glad that they have something like a tool like that now to teach young people about consent. Yeah. Especially like, I just love that it pertains to like tea. Like, if somebody does want tea and then they change their mind and they don't want the tea, you can't force them to drink the tea. Don't force no tea. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? So I love that. I love how it was like put together.
But it also stems from like, there are children out there that have parents that are also not in the right mind, that wouldn't want to advise their children on this is right, this is wrong. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So then school should actually be that foundation to build and help grow. Do you know what I mean? The same way you can teach us English, science. Do you know what I mean? You should be able to teach us the main facts of life, like, and how to be, and do you know what I mean?
I actually dig that, but based on what I said, for sure. So based on what we've been speaking about, let's actually see what the young people had to say with regards to consent. Do you know what consent means?
Yes.
Yeah, consent is, expressly giving an agreement to whatever's taking place.
So like, just saying no means no and yes means yes, basically. Yeah, so consent means you have to give full acceptance of somebody making a sexual put like advance on you.
So like giving someone permission to do something? Yeah. So if I'm able to, like, I'm not drunk, not on drugs or any sort, able to outright say yes. And if I haven't said yes, then it's a no.
So based on what we just heard, a lot of the young people are aware of what consent is and what their rights are when it comes to consent, and that it means that basically it has to be a mutual yes. So both parties are getting into something that they want to get into, and they both continuously want to engage in it as well, because you could obviously start off something and then somebody could say no.
I also wanted to touch up on one of the young people that said about drinking and being intoxicated. I think that in itself, someone being intoxicated, that isn't consensual.
Yeah, because you can't say, you're not in the right mind frame to make a good decision if you're intoxicated by drink or drugs. And I feel like I don't know if you've ever watched a movie and like the woman's intoxicated and she's even putting it on the man as well, but respectfully he's like, no, he might help her take off her shoes or whatever and put her to bed. And it's just like, I love seeing stuff like that, because it's like he didn't take advantage of the fact that just because she was drunk and she wanted it,
that he could have given it to her.
Because he's helping her to make that decision, because she might wake up in the morning and feel like, instant regret, what did I do? Do you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like it's good when somebody is responsible enough to actually make that overall decision for everyone and actually revoke their consent and saying, well, I don't give consent actually, because if I give consent, they still feel like they're taking advantage of that person, even though that person could even be sticking it on them. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I think it's really good that that person touched on that for sure. But then it also leads on to other things where people can have advantage, because it's an advantage, isn't it, if somebody's drunk and you might not be as drunk or might not be drunk, which is that some people take advantage of younger people when it comes to things like grooming, giving them drugs, giving them alcohol.
Definitely. They dish it out for free because they don't mind getting the stuff so that they can have their minutes of pleasure or be where they want to be. Like, groomers try and take advantage to the deepest step. So when it comes to grooming, I feel like it's not always young people, but usually young people are victimized in this when it comes to grooming. Yeah. Because it's always someone that's older that has more money, more like experience in life, and they'll take advantage of usually the younger person. It can be someone older, could be someone the same age. It's more mind manipulation, but when it comes to the younger person, it's like you're giving them things that they'd want, or like you'll give them things like that they want to try, like for instance drugs or like alcohol. And we all know once you get started on something, it's hard to come off. It's an addiction. And if per se like a young person was to get addicted and was, I don't know, for example, smoking or getting on heavier drugs, how are they going to handle themselves for the future? How are they going to be able to even get out of that cycle that the person's putting them in?
That's true, you know, because then even if they do come out of that lifestyle, it's like they're going to have to unlearn a lot of those things. But yeah, I definitely agree when it comes to people actually using like drugs and alcohol to be able to influence that young person and take advantage of them. And often what they do is they find a weakness in that person. Like what's the home life like, for example? Home life might even be good, but there might be something happening at the time where the young person feels like they might not have anybody to turn to or whatever, or they might not have the best.
They want more.
Yeah, precisely.
More than what you're given.
Yeah, literally. And they feel like they're receiving like love that they're not receiving at home, or attention that they're not receiving at home. But what they're not realizing is that it's not. They might be getting the attention, but it's not the right attention. Yeah, and it's not attention so that they can actually benefit from it. It's attention so that the other person can then use that against them and benefit themselves from what they're giving the young person. So I think that young people need to be really careful when it comes to those kind of things. It's very difficult, however, to kind of, all you can really do is teach young people. And I feel like now that they are teaching things like consent, and you know, they do speak more about safeguarding and things with young people now. Good. Yeah, but it helps people to look up for. No, it wasn't. It was just more like you heard that this happened or this person's been groomed. You find out after it's already happened. Yeah, and then everyone's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. And it's like, but there are signs and stuff. So now we're taught those signs and stuff. And I feel like in schools now they're more open when it comes to teaching these things, so that young people can even look out for, and they can even look out for their friends and look out for one another as well. Definitely. So I kudos to the school system. Kudos to the school system, because they're starting to
wisening up. Because when we were in school, it wasn't like that.
No, it was not. But also, it could also come from like an abusive power or an abusive trust, which means that it's somebody that can be within your family. So it might not be like your mom or dad, but it might be like an older brother, an uncle, a cousin, a family friend, somebody that is taking advantage of the fact that they know you, so they know how to take advantage of you as well, because they know you, and then you feel like you can trust that person, and so you kind of become naive to it because you know that person and they know you. You're reliant on them. So you're like, this person's got me. They've got my back. They wouldn't do anything to hurt me or bring me to harm, but really they have their own, intentions. Yeah.
And some are taught from young. Like I've heard stories where like a young girl will be raped constantly by like her uncle, but then she'll think that was natural. She'll think like, because that's I'm not doing anything wrong, and I'm not in the wrong, and I'm not doing anything to harm anyone, and this is natural. This is something that I have to do. Do you get it?
Yes, because because she knows that person. So, and it's all that she knows. If something's how can I explain it? There are many things in life that are not normal that are normalized.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
and that's because they're brought up in that environment.
Precisely, and like it can come from like we said before, like an uncle, a family friend. When you're a young person, you're gonna listen to the adult.
Yeah, we're brought up to listen to our adults.
Because you're told to be seen and not heard. You're told, you know, that obviously that you know, this person is older than you. You have to give respect, all these kind of things. Respect your elders, all of the things that are said, and respectfully, no, because what it does is it makes you think like, okay, it almost makes you feel like you have to protect that person as well, because they're an adult and you've been told like to respect them. You've been told you have to listen to them, and they're
Which
really
isn't right.
Yeah, and they're taking advantage of that fact as well. They know, they're very aware of what they're doing,
and they can coach you into believing what they're doing is right when you're older. Like
precisely,
it's terrible.
And then they either, like, you often hear somebody that either threaten the family or say like, or threaten the person's well-being in some way, like, well, if you tell, this is gonna happen,
then your parents will look at you differently and this and that. It does happen.
Like,
it does.
And it's just like, that's not the case. And I feel like I'm not so aware, but I wish like there were more places where young people can go to when it comes to those kind of things, where they could just turn up. I feel like one of the episodes we had before, we spoke about like youth services and stuff like that, and I wish like we had more youth services, because when you have more youth services like youth clubs and stuff like that that are more like open and like walk in, you always have that feeling of like family and feeling safe, acceptance, it's which means that you feel like even if you don't go to one of the like youth workers, you might say it to one of your friends there, and then they might be like, come, like, let's talk to somebody, or I know somebody that we can talk to actually discuss this, and then you can turn to somebody to kind of resolve it. So in that respect, I really do wish that there were more like youth services in general, because it could also help that aspect of things when it comes to like this issue. And that brings me to our next question, which is, do you believe that there is enough information about this out there? Do you believe that there's enough information or places to go to where you can gain info on this?
Yes and no. I mean, when it comes to getting help, there are places to get help, but it's all like mental. It is, whether you want to accept the help or not, whether you feel like the help will help you and benefit you. Do you know what I mean? So it's 50-50.
I definitely believe like there used to be so much more services, but before I get into that, let's see what the young people had to say about the services that are available or the information that's available. Do you believe that there is enough information and services available when regarding sexual rights in the Bedfordshire area?
Yeah, I could definitely go and find out. Yeah. If I call someone, if I ask someone, if I went to maybe a doctor's surgery, I could definitely find out about it. I think off the top of my head, I only know that there's one. And that's at LND, right? No? Okay. I think so, I'm not quite sure. But on that topic, I don't think so.
Again, me and my personal opinion, I'll say you still got to educate yourself first before you start educating other people. Things change all the time. I don't think people have got a definitive decision on what a sexual right is. So then it changes all the time. Someone changes their sex and then it changes. So get your rights first, and then I think start spreading education. Thank
you. Not really. I wouldn't say it's a massive thing. I feel like in my college especially, we have a thing called tutorial, and it's just basically we talk about things that happen in everyday life, but they never mention anything about consent or anything. So I feel like that's a subject that needs to be brought up a lot more, because it's a very important thing.
I haven't seen any that much, so I would say that there's probably room for improvement there, just so more people are aware.
I think there's a few, like, it's mainly just like posters, like, you know, there'll be like something like a pop-up like, oh, consent is this, but it's not really like spoken about. It's just like you see it and you just like think, okay, yeah, it's that.
There doesn't seem to be a lot of information out there, and the young people have spoken and said so. Like, I feel like the information is there. If you want to look it up or speak to somebody that knows, as young people, we know you can go on the internet and whatever.
That is true.
But I feel like it's not advertised. I feel like certain things are put in place, like for like regulations, like we have to follow this so that we can, like, to make sure that this information is here, but nobody's not really saying or promoting that the information is there. I feel like there needs to be more campaigns that are televised, that actually speak about consent, that actually speak about sexual rights, so that young people know what kind of decisions they're making, so that people can question themselves as well and be like, oh, have I been a bit forceful to somebody before? And it might not be like a huge deal, but it is at the same time, and it's a lesson learned as well, because sometimes the main issue is that we're not educated on something, and so that's why, you know, you might not make the best decisions, or you might think that something is okay. A young man could not necessarily force himself on a girl, but they could be at a party or whatever, they go in a room together, they end up doing their thing. She kind of feels like forced, even though she didn't say yes, even though she didn't say no, she didn't say yes, but so she might feel like she was forced into a corner, but then he might have felt like, well, the pressure as well of, he's a young man, he might not have had sex before, whatever it might be, he wants to, you know, do it with this person. Like, both of them could be so oblivious, but if you're not, it's because they're not educated on it. So I definitely feel like there needs to be more televised campaigns that are speaking about sexual rights, sexual consent, so that young people are aware of what decisions to make. So yeah.
Also, I think that it should be a bit more vocalized in primary schools, because when I was in primary school, like I said, I only learnt about my body, how it works. It wasn't like, they didn't really give us any, if you feel like you can't talk to anyone, you come, do you know what I mean? That I feel like they need to open up and give kids more of an opportunity to actually want to talk about things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that
because
too.
Me growing up, I didn't have that. So
it's like there's a stigma against it's a bit,
especially reflecting on it now, you look and you think like, why wasn't I told if someone's abusing you or making you feel uncomfortable to come and, do you know what I mean, and vocalize it,
or
and
who
make
to
it
report
known.
it to, or who to turn to, or what to say.
So I feel like maybe it should be a bit more, like I said, vocalized in primary schools, because when I heard one of the young people say in his college is spoke about, but not in detail and not about consent. We need that from young. You do, because otherwise you're going to grow up and you're going to teach yourself how to live, and you can, but you'd rather know the right way.
And other people's way are different ways.
Yeah,
most definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you guys so much for watching. It has been great. And remember, if somebody doesn't want a cup of tea, don't force it. Tea.